Hello everyone, and welcome to this Bob's Guide Clear to Pay webinar, a hitchhiker's guide to EMV. This webinar will give you strategic insight and a head start to navigating the challenges on the road to EMV. My name is Joy McKnight, and I'm editor of GT News, an association for financial professionals company and sister publication of Bob's Guide. So first, to introduce our speakers, we'll be hearing shortly from Clear to Pay. First we have Ainsley Ward, Head of Management Consulting, Jim Woodward, Head of Products, Card Solutions, Greg Smith, Head of Products and Test Solutions, Gerd Thays, Head of Technology, Test Solutions, and Ian Kerr, General Manager, Test Solutions. Before we go any further, I have a few housekeeping points. If you experience difficulties joining the WebEx session, please contact WebEx technical support at +1 866 229 3239. Please note that as an attendee, you are part of a larger audience today. However, due to privacy concerns, the attendee number and list is not shown for all attendees. All attendees will remain in a listen-only mode throughout the presentation. And as a reminder, today's call is being recorded, so if you miss anything or think a caller would be interested in listening, you will be sent a link to the recording as soon as it is available. For today's event, you may ask an online question at any time throughout the presentation by simply clicking on the question mark icon located on the floating toolbar at the bottom right of your screen. We will address as many questions as time permits today at the conclusion of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, which is Ian. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Joy. Welcome to everybody, wherever you may be, and thank you for joining our webinar today, A Hitchhiker's Guide to EMV. For those that do not know the company well, just a brief introduction to Clear to Pay. Clear to Pay is a payments innovation company headquartered in Belgium but operating globally through four main business divisions. We have a core payment processing business unit. We have an open card solutions business unit. We also offer consulting services around strategic matters concerning the payments industry. And the business unit that I look after is in the testing sphere of operations, where we have an end-to-end suite of solutions focused on everything to do with payments and particularly around cards and EMV. So hopefully we have got a wealth of experience to share with you today as we talk about some of the issues around EMV migration. The topics that we want to tackle today are shown on the slide in front of you. We will go through this through a series of presentations from my colleagues, but basically looking to talk about some of the strategic issues of an EMV migration program, some of the considerations from a switching and processing point of view, clearly the implications around the increased testing burden of an EMV program, and looking to the future, talking a little bit about some of the additional capabilities that an investment in an EMV infrastructure can enable. After a brief summary, we'll then hand back to Joy for the question and answer session, and hopefully we'll have plenty of questions and we'll be able to follow up on all of your queries. I think we're aiming to finish in about an hour, but hopefully then we can tackle all of those questions in good time at the end. So on that point, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, which is Ainsley Ward from our consulting business.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. My name is Ainsley Ward. I am the Head of Management Consulting here at Clear to Pay. Also a former product manager in the Chip Centre of Excellence at MasterCard, and an advisor to the European Savings Banks on cards and payments. Today I'm going to take you through a little bit, in the first instance, about what is EMV, where does it come from, and what benefits does it bring you. And hopefully that will help set the scene for the rest of the speakers today to ensure we're all on a level footing. So we'll start at the very beginning, a couple of definitions for you. Now, EMV is a group of specifications for payment infrastructure. It's named after the three organizations that initially created the specifications, which were Europay, MasterCard and Visa. But now the owners of these specifications include other organizations such as JCB, Amex, and a number of the significant stakeholders in the cards and payments industry. They all look after the maintenance and evolution of these specifications. You hear a number of words today, some of them loosely based around chip card, which is a traditional payment card, but instead of using the magnetic stripe on the back of it, it uses a small chip that's embedded into the card and has a small contact plate, which looks a little bit like this. Lots of names for the chip card. Could be an EMV card, EMV contact card, smart card, stored value card, ICC. You'll hear a lot of these as you go through the EMV migration. Additionally, just to complicate things, they added in a contactless interface, which allows this type of card to use the chip inside but not directly contacted with the terminal. That actually has an antenna inside which allows the data from the chips to be passed directly to the terminal without having to touch it. And to add a bit more complication, we can have a dual interface card where the chip is connected to both the antenna for contactless transactions and also to the contact plate. So EMV really is the biggest shake-up of the market since the launch of the iPod. It might sound a strange comparison, but the main difference between EMV and magstripe for an issuer is the range of choices that can be made. So if you imagine back in the early 80s when you had music, it would either come on the cassette or a vinyl record like this. Basically, it was burnt one time, and that was all you got. It was a passive. All that happened was that the record player would read it. It had a limited data capacity. You could only fit one song onto one of these things unless you had an album. You could perhaps get up to 7, maybe 8 songs per side. And really, there were 2, maybe 3 sizes of this thing, and that was all you had to deal with. So there wasn't much choice. That really equates to our magstripe card. There's only a limited amount of data that can fit on that. It's generally a write-once product. Now, our iPods really equates directly to our chip cards. You're able to put lots of flexible content on there. It's highly active. It is effectively a computer, so it's able to interact with the terminal that it's put into, and able to perform encryption, and able to perform complex processing. Typically, it's considerably higher capacity than your magnetic stripe card, which means that you're able to really store a lot more data on there and do a lot more things. And the beauty of this is it can be really tailored to your needs, so you can do a lot more with it. So really what EMV brings is not just a change in specifications, but a move forwards that enables you to differentiate your business using the power of the card. But chip cards retain a lot of the recognizable features of the predecessors because they have to remain backwards compatible in a network that is not constantly changing. What this means is nothing really goes away when you move to EMV. So you still need to keep a lot of the familiar recognizable features on the card. You still have to support magstripe. You still have to support zip-zap transactions, so with the lovely carbon paper. You still have to support your CMP transactions. EMV is just yet another level of acceptance, another level of complexity. So a typical card will still retain its program brand and issuer. We'll see the addition of the EMV chip, still keep features for visual identification such as the hologram, the primary account number on the front, the acceptance brand, still retain the cardholder name visibly on the card so it can still be used by those other acceptance methods. The card still expires roughly in 3 years. Here on the back we have a number of the standard features that you're used to seeing. So our magnetic stripe remains on the card, so that component remains still to be accepted within your network. And really what you need to think about as you go forwards into an EMV migration is that your systems and processes need to be able to handle this considerable extension of scope. So whereas your traditional acceptance methods, so your traditional issuing methods were limited in scope, with EMV there are so many new choices that it really becomes a considerable change to your systems. Now, what I'll do is I'll look at it from the issuing side, just to allow you to see some of the extra information that allows you to configure cards specifically to your business requirements. Now, this is a step forward from magnetic stripe. There's a whole list of things that you can do with a chip card that mean it can be completely personalized, not only to your portfolio, but perhaps even to sub-portfolio or sub-sub-portfolio. You can really target things towards specific customer segments. One of the first things to consider will be your cardholder verification method. Typically in European rollouts of EMV, there's been a lot of offline PIN usage, whereas rollouts that we've seen in Asia typically tend to be with signature verification. We see that there is an ongoing story around this in the US, and that likely we will see the signature with EMV for credit cards and debit. The continuing debate over signature and PIN goes on. Authentication method really lets you decide how the card will work once it's in market. So do you want every single one of your transactions to go online? So you have an always online card. Do you want every one of your transactions to be always offline? The benefit of which being that you get considerably faster transaction time, so perhaps in closed-loop environments such as stadia or events. Do you want to check what the terminal can do? So your card will say, if it's an online terminal, I'll go online. If it's an offline terminal, I'll stay offline. Do you want to have offline transactions until you hit the fourth transaction, and therefore force a transaction to go online? Do you want to stay offline below $50 limit? There's lots of things you can do with the authentication method, and you can personalize that into the chip to make the card work the way you want it to. So you can set upper and lower limits, which allow you to do things such as velocity checking. You can have transaction counters to really determine how many times the card has been used, or as an incremental value for other purposes. So perhaps if you wanted to store an offline balance replication that could be read by an external reader, you can use the transaction counters as a space to store those values. We have a whole set of things called CACs, the Card Issue Action Codes. These really are telling the card what to do if certain things happen. So it enables you to tailor the behavior of your card to certain situations. For example, if the PIN try offline has been exceeded, what does the card do? Does it just stop the application? Does it force the transaction online? Does it try to run issuer scripting? What to do if offline PIN verification has failed, or the maximum offline transaction amount has been exceeded? You have a whole raft of things that you can do to manage the way your card behaves, and therefore change the behavior of the card towards your customers. We also have a whole set of card risk management parameters, the CDOLs, which essentially is a data object list where you can force specific components of information to be sent back to you, which allow you to further interrogate the card and look at how you can prevent fraud. You can have elements such as transaction currency code, the date of the transaction, the terminal type, so whether it's been performed on a POS, whether it's been performed on a terminal that's stuck into a vending machine, whether it's any other type of transaction. You can look at the transaction location, so you can go specifically to the country. You can even look specifically at the county and maybe even the city in which the transaction has happened. You can have a look at the amount that's been authorized, and you can even use the card to send you unpredictable numbers that are verified by certain elements on your side. A chip card also has the ability to help you with currency conversion. Now, chip cards can store specific currency conversion values that can be applied at POS versus the standard terminal values. That can be used to create a product with known characteristics, or to allow specific rates to be agreed between the issuer and the customer. For example, if you have a customer that only travels specifically to one country, at every review period with them, you can set specific transaction currency rates that they will pre-agree with you, and therefore you store them in the card, and that will be the specific rate that would be applied for the transaction. And one of the particular advantages of chip cards is that you can have multiple applications on a single card. We're starting to see some examples of this appearing in a number of markets. The most prevalent product is a dual credit and debit card, where the terminal allows the cardholder to select at the point of decision whether they're going to use their credit product or use their debit product. We're seeing a number of firms also adding loyalty to cards at this point. We're also seeing good examples in France where there is a credit card, but also a different loan payment card, which allows you to eat into a specific payment loan. So this enables you to define how your card will work in the field and really differentiate you from your competitors. But because this is within the EMV framework, it's interoperable and it offers known behaviors and global compatibility. So as long as you stay within the rules, traditionally your cards will work most times, 9 times out of 10. Or I'm sure people from the schemes will tell us it's 101 times out of 100. Chip cards also enable you to support features such as offline balance management that we talked about earlier on. Allows you to have balances such as pre-auth. And again, a lot of these are used in offline environments. So if your cards are running in a purely online environment, you won't use a number of these features. But it enables you to set up your card so that when you are doing specific projects, then the offline features are available to you. One of the other useful things that a chip card allows you to do is combined with a further specification called EMVCo, you're able to have an application that uses the encryption already on the card to create one-time passcodes. So therefore, as an alternative to a number of the one-time passcode generators that you supply for entry onto e-banking or to support 3D Secure in different ways. What we're seeing in the US is really a paradox in the EMV migration. It's moderately simple to migrate to EMV. There's a set process that you go through. There are a number of things that you need to consider, but if you follow through the process, it is pretty simple to do. But given the constraints that you have in the US market with very little time to do it, and a lot to consider because it is adding this additional layer of complexity, then it does make things a little more difficult. And Europe actually spent 18 years migrating to EMV, and on the whole, we're just about there. But the mandates for the US, in some cases, give just over 18 months. So there's a considerable compression of the timescale. Now, with the US being a latecomer to the worldwide EMV family, really do benefit from the experience of many migrations, some of which will be very similar to the US market, such as those in Asia where they're using signature-based transactions and completely online. And some will be completely opposed to the standards that are going to be set in the US market, so those that are using fully offline transactions. But there are a number of experienced organizations around the world, and they are able to help you out on these solutions. But first of all, you need to be sure of what it is that you want to achieve. What is it that your product wants to do? What it is that you want to have your product do when it gets into market, and that will set a lot of the parameters that you put into the card. Now we know the US is a unique market with a sense of itself and what makes it work. It has a very, very different business structure to many other markets around the world, and there's no reason to lose this. EMV is an additional layer from a technology perspective. It's an additional opportunity from a business perspective, and I'm sure that the US will approach this in the US's own unique way. Because really, what have worked in the MaxRite world is directly transferable. What you did well before, you're still going to do in EMV. And I think you will bring a lot to the EMV table and really start to help other payment systems around the world. So thank you very much for listening. I'm now going to hand it to Jim Woodworth.
Okay, thank you, Ainsley. My name is Jim Woodworth. I've been doing EMV projects in banks, both on the merchant and the issuing side, for the last 15 years. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes. I've got about 8 slides, and I want to drive 4 conclusions from these slides. First of all, that commercial factors will ensure quick EMV success in the USA. Second, I think the US is well placed to take the lead in the EMV, particularly with its mobile and contactless possibilities. third, I want to draw on the experience I've had with the banks and processors and acquirers that I've worked with in the past 15 years, and look at the different functional areas that require change, and look at the different strategies required to address those. And then finally, I'd like to conclude with testing is absolutely crucial in all these areas. So if I may start with an analogy, I think EMV is a bit like mobile telephony at the moment. If you look at the history of mobile telephony, the US built a strong domestic scale business with TDMA and CDMA. The rest of the world then adopted a different standard, GSM. It was slower to adopt those standards, but the sheer global scale of those drove the success of GSM. Since then, the US has adopted Edge and LTE, and has had the best of both worlds. Superior technological drive with the adoption of global standards. I think the same thing could apply to the EMV world as well. So why will EMV succeed in the USA? Firstly, the US has got a long history of technical innovation. I remember working for my previous company, but two, developing Visa Cash for the Atlanta Olympics. That was 15 or 16 years ago. That was smart card technology driven, but it was US, and the US is perfectly happy with that. I've worked with contactless in the US, driven by commercial rather than standards issues, but the US was first in the contactless boat. And in my experience of global chip projects show really there's three types of drivers. There's technological demonstrations, for instance, Mondex, for instance, the Atlanta Visa trials. There's public policy and government, and in my experience, those were the drivers in a number of European and Middle Eastern and Asian countries, and then the drive for commercial advantage. Let's look at three of those in turn. I'm very familiar with the UK adoption of EMV. That was very much a public policy initiative. For that reason, it was quite slow, it took its time, there's a lot of cooperation between the banks, and it eventually got there, but it was quite slow. I've seen other people or other countries adopt EMV, what I think are particularly are reasons that they just like to show off the technology, particularly some smaller countries. They've also been quite slow, and it hasn't really happened. What's really driven adoption has been commercial issues. And the two key drivers towards EMV adoption. As I say, in the UK, it was fairly slow until the liability shift, and then suddenly adoption was very quick. The liability shift is happening very quickly in the US, and I believe that will really drive the market. Secondly, the PCI audit relief for EMV-enabled merchants is a great initiative, I think, from the card companies, and again, that has the potential to drive the adoption of EMV very quickly in the US. Ainsley mentioned in the previous presentation that the US has 18 months, where the rest of the world took 18 years. In my experience, when commercial drives like liability shift, like PCI audit relief are the drivers, and things can happen very, very quickly. However, there is still much to do. I've used this particular slide a lot of times in the last 10 years, or variations on that theme. And the basic message of this slide was, currently, guys, you're at the bottom, you're issuing and acquiring magnetic stripes, but sooner or later there's a ladder you have to move up. There's not just putting chips on the cards, it's not just putting payment applications on the cards. There's also mass personalization, the possibilities for instant in-branch issuance, the possibilities to put multiple different types of application on the card, the possibilities to put contactless EMV, to put mobile applications as well. And I have to say, all of these have distinct commercial benefits to individual banks, but also in my experience, despite the fact I have been showing this slide for 10 years, it hasn't had an awful lot of effect. And too many people are stuck on the second step. They've issued a payment application on a card. They're quite content to acquire payment applications at their devices, but they haven't done much more than that. I think the US, particularly with Visa and MasterCard and the schemes driving mobile and contactless, as well as EMV contactless, has a real opportunity to take a lead in this market and move very quickly to the top of that staircase and be much more technologically proficient and reap the benefits of technology quicker than the rest of the world. So I see a distinct possibility that the US will, in 3 or 4 years' time, go from being a laggard to being the leader in the benefits of EMV. As I say, I've worked with a lot of processors, merchant acquirers, and issuers on adopting EMV over the last 15 years. And essentially, the programs I've been involved in very early on, each of these institutions makes a choice, and they divide the functional areas within their domain into 3 key areas. And those key areas typically are the core systems, ancillary systems, and others. And there's a choice they make in each of those areas. And the choice is to either use some sort of substitute to get round the complexities of EMV processing, what we used to call an EMV proxy, what in the States you often call an on behalf of service. Second opportunity is to take the second strategy is to take the opportunity to modernize your payments infrastructure, what we used to call a transformation policy, which is, okay, I've got an old magstripe-based infrastructure, it's been creaking for quite a while, let's just take this opportunity to throw everything away and let's have a nice new gleaming system. By far the most prominent strategy is to extend the current systems by bolting EMV onto the existing infrastructure. Many banks around the world, and particularly in the US, use commercial off-the-shelf software packages from a variety of vendors. Most of those vendors, in my experience, do have EMV extension packages. They all have been tested in the last 10 years. They all work pretty well. So for many of you, in most areas, the most common strategy for approaching EMV will be to extend the current systems. But again, in my experience, a mixture of the above strategies is quite reasonable as well. Certainly use on behalf of systems to buy time or as the first part of a transformation strategy. Use extensions when it's feasible and cost effective in the long term. And when there is absolutely no option, if you're using a homegrown COBOL system or your vendor doesn't want to modernize your system to support EMV, then you have the opportunity to go for a transformation approach and change your systems to a more EMV-friendly system. Just to give you an example of what an on-behalf of service looks like, this is a type of service that we've done quite a few times in different territories. This is an example of an issuer using an on-behalf of service. This is an in-house example where we have an EMV proxy that sits between the schemes where the transactions emanate and the legacy magstripe infrastructure. And the proxy server handles all the complexities of EMV. So it works with the key management system to do the verification of ARQCs, to do AID calculation, to calculate ARPCs. So you don't have to change the legacy system, and all the complexity of EMV can be handled in either the outsourced on behalf of service or an in-house proxy service. This, in my experience, is something that can give you short-term benefits. It's worth having a look at, particularly if you are engaged in a longer-term transformation process, which I know a lot of people in the States are for various reasons, and it can buy you time whilst you transform or completely modernize your legacy infrastructure. So don't rule it out. It is a system that's been tried a few times, and it does work. Probably, as I say, not a long-term option though. I apologize for this slide. It's not the most clearest slide in the world. I didn't really specify it very well when I asked our marketing guys to draw it. But I'm looking at a typical card issuer. And as I say, the programs I've been involved in, we tend to split the issuer processing into 3 key domains. Into the card production service, into the clearing and authorization service, and into the ancillary services domain. On the card production domain, in my experience, is where the biggest changes typically take place. Many banks, and probably there's quite a few people in the audience who might nod their heads at this moment, have card production environments that will have multiple card production environments. They have one for debit, one for credit, one for prepaid. Maybe as a result of mergers and acquisitions, they have a number of card production environments. That was certainly the case with a few of the banks that we worked with. And they made the decision then to consolidate card production onto one system that was EMV friendly. There is the opportunity, whilst you're doing that, to go a step further and invest in what I call an EMV token manager in this diagram, and invest not only in a modernized card production environment, but also enhance that with a chip application management system. So the whole life cycle of the chip, when chip applications are run out, when they need to be reissued, when they're modernized or new versions come out, can be managed by a chip application system. In my experience, that's where the biggest changes took place in that card and chip production environments. Also in the authorization and clearing system, changes have to be made to take into account the new EMV fields, the field 55 changes, and all the extra processing that takes place for EMV. Don't forget the possibilities of enhancing your risk authorization system as well. A couple of customers, we actually enhanced their risk management system with the parameters from chip cards. We used those as a basis for scoring transactions, and we found we got quite significant results from feeding that EMV information into the risk system. So think about that as well when you're modernizing the system. The ancillary systems, customer service, analytics, marketing, all those systems, just about every system in the bank has some change, either small or large. And certainly, as we went through the program, every day it seemed to us there was a new banking system that we hadn't thought about that required change. So early on, identify which systems need change and do not underestimate the testing effort that's involved in changing multiple systems in a bank. On the merchant processor side, again, this slide suffers the same fate as my previous slide, but again, on the acquirer side, we split the domains into core, switching, and ancillary. The merchant processor landscape in the States is significantly different from many other countries, and I think there's a real opportunity here to do something innovative with EMV. There aren't many payment system processors outside the US that offer the full range of services that merchant processors do in the US. For instance, gift cards, loyalty services, check auth, all those types of things. So whereas in most other parts of the world we were focused on acquirer services and just the payment side of chip cards, there's a real opportunity on the merchant processor side for looking at different chip application processing and really reaping the benefits that EMV can bring. And moving on finally to my last couple of slides, EMV changes things. For an issuer, a redefinition of card products, additional keys, applications, and card profiles, new issuance processes from onboarding to card production to chip application management, the need to adapt to EMV messages, including the processing of EMV scripts, the potential for new CMS systems, new partners. I'll leave you that final message. Testing and certification occupies a key part of the program in moving as an issuer from magstripe to chip card issuing. Similarly, on the merchant processor side, you know all this, I'm sure. The POS Terminal application, new cards, new hardware, they all have to be tested. Don't forget on the ATM side, there's additional rules for EMV there. New risk management opportunities, changes to your links to your switches, your acquirer switches. And again, I'll say it again, there's an awful lot of testing. All the different aspects of EMV mean changes to just about every aspect of your system is going to involve an awful lot of testing. So hopefully that gives you some insight as to what's happened in the rest of the world, what the strategies to adopt for moving to EMV. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Greg Smith. We're going to move on to his next slide, and he will be talking further about testing and certification. Thank you.
All right, thank you. My name is Greg Smith. I work as the head of product for the Clear2Pay Open Testing Solutions. I'm related to our Scottsdale office, so we are a local American-based provider. The interesting thing about EMV is that the U.S. has driven a lot of the technology, but we hardly have adopted any of it. Before I get too deep into testing, though, I wanted to tell you a couple of things as an American I've run into. My local gastropub recently, I used my chip card. There's a few issuers in America already issuing chip cards. I used my chip card, and they were unable to process my transaction. because their POS device told them they needed to use the chip card reader. Their POS device didn't have a chip card reader, and even if it had one, it didn't have a network that was capable of understanding the chip data. So already in the U.S., customers are running into EMV compatibility problems, which is a great intro to testing. The other reason we want to bring EMV faster to the U.S. is, as someone that travels quite a bit, I may be over in Europe, and if I want to use a subway system over there, very often I have to use an unmanned kiosk. Those unmanned kiosks will only accept EMV chip and PIN cards. This means EMV cards that can do the PIN verification on the card. Almost all of the U.S. issuers only issue chip and signature cards. So even though they're giving me a chip card as a U.S. person, they're not giving me a card that's actually useful yet in Europe. That said, I had a very good introduction that EMV changes everything, and we're going to have to test all these different areas. We're going to have new cards with all those business rules you were hearing about. We're going to have a card-to-terminal interface, whether it's a hardware or a contactless interface. On the terminal itself, you're going to have software changes to handle new terminal business rules. From the terminal, you've got to send a message up to some sort of acquirer host. Then it goes to a payment network, and eventually an issuer, and finally after midnight or whenever you're going to clear that. What does this look like in a little bit more detail? We're going to have to test and certify at every level. When we look at these levels, card and terminal, some of the things here, and really card-to-terminal interface is primarily a hardware interface, but here's some of the data that's going to go back and forth. And I did say back and forth. EMV is a bidirectional communication, whether we're doing a contact or contactless transaction. The application and application version are going to have to go through. There's some cryptography based on static and dynamic data on the card. Offline and online pins, that can be a choice between the terminal and the card, what's supported. Offline limits, we talk about the ability to do transactions out where we have no communications. Well, we're running out of places without communications, but it still may be faster if you want someone to buy a soda at a soda machine and not have to go online to approve that. Your fraud loss there is 50 cents or $1 or whatever. Velocity checking, are we doing too many transactions in a row, a potential sign of fraud. Issuer script, the terminal is going to have to be able to accept issuer scripts back from the payment networks and send these scripts onto the card. What can these scripts do? They can adjust things like the offline limits, or they can reset fraud counters, or they can change the PIN, or do a number of things. So terminals such as POS and ATM can become an extension of the issuer's IT systems and do things that the customer used to need to go into a branch or call an 800 number to do. On the side of the terminal hardware, some of the changes, well, you're going to be needing to add a contact reader. The contact readers are a physical ISO specification. They're very standard. Many, for instance, Dell business laptops have the contact readers in them already. And it's essentially the same hardware as the SIM card in a GSM telephone. So contact readers have been out forever. They're commodity hardware. On NFC and wireless, it's still a bit in flux. In our market, we do have PayPass and PayWave, Visa and MasterCard's technologies. We've got Discover's contactless technology and American Express as well. But I'm starting to talk about technologies. That technology is it's a negotiation between the POS Terminal Software or the ATM software and the card. Not every terminal is going to support every card, just like not every merchant signs up for every card scheme out there. There are currently 15 or more registered EMV applications, and each one of these is going to require testing. What type of testing? The EMV kernel itself will have an EMV version number. Currently we're at version 4.3, and there's been 4 major revisions of EMV in 8 years. What EMV gets you is it gets you guaranteed physical and logical compatibility between the contact or contactless interface at level 1 and it gives you guaranteed set of commands that are available on the card at level 2. On top of that, the card has an application. And earlier it was talked about that you may have multiple applications on one card. That gets into your POS Terminal software may be required to give the user his choice of application. If a terminal has a display and buttons, or is capable of talking to the user at a grocery store may need to be able to select whether they're going to do a debit transaction today or a credit transaction. And that is a different application on the card, each with different business rules. The terminal itself may have different business rules and be willing to accept a higher offline transaction amount for a credit application versus a debit, and vice versa. On the ATM side, I spent a lot of time doing testing for ATMs, and ATM testing market is a difficult one to begin with. To add EMV to this, it's really bad timing. If we look at what's going on with Windows XP, which the largest percentage of our ATM plan is currently running on, Windows XP lost mainstream support from Microsoft back in 2009, and extended support is over in 2014. Well, 2014 is awfully close to all these cutoff dates that we've got for EMV from Visa, MasterCard, and the rest of the issuers. So ATM people are looking at not just changes to add EMV parameters, but they may be looking at an upgrade to Windows 7 at the same time. What are we looking at changes at the POS and the ATM level? There are host changes, acquirer host changes or device handler changes to provide EMV parameters back to the POS or the ATM. In the ATM world, that means there's going to be new states, EMV-specific states in the download, such as getting the transaction type out of an EMV configuration, or what we do on various failures. What type of fallback do we support? Is if the chip reader in the ATM or the POS device is defective, are we going to allow magnetic stripe fallback? In the case I brought up at the very beginning, that gastropub, that POS device needs to know that it doesn't even have a chip reader and allow them to swipe the mag card. That's where their software defect is. When they swipe the mag card, there's a service code in there that indicates it's an ICC card. And so the POS device is trying to force them to use ICC. The other things that we're going to get from the device handler side is the device handler is going to tell the ATM a list of EMV applications the ATM is compatible with, what transaction types it's going to do. It's going to send screens information on what to do when there's multiple applications to select. It may even give the user some conveniences. Instead of asking the user what language they'd like to use in the beginning, the EMV card can just tell the ATM, please use English or please use Spanish. So there's just a ton of parameters that are going to change on the ATM itself, whether it's the operating system just due to the timing right now, to the vendor application to add the EMV support, to the actual communication, additional fields in the network messages up to the device handler, and on and on. As we look through this, the card networks themselves are going to have testing requirements for their specific cards. So EMV has a certification for its versions, and the card issuers such as Visa, MasterCard, etc., they will have certifications they're going to require your terminal to go through. Common names here, Terminal Integration Program, I believe, and ADVT, I can't remember what that one stands for. ADVT is the Visa program. They will require you to test each terminal or each ATM with a set of test cards. You're going to be combining a combined test of card, terminal, your host protocol, your device handler, and the payment network. So what they're going to ask you to do is insert card number 1, run this transaction type, and see if you get an authorization on the Visa ISO network, for instance, and then they're going to ask you to do card number 2, and they're going to expect the card to reject that transaction before it even hits the network, and so on and so on. You're going to have dozens to hundreds of test cases depending on which type of transactions you support and how many payment networks you want to support. So as I had mentioned, there's going to be the positive and negative test cases, and these test cases are going to exercise business rules, things like offline limit. If you're using a contactless card, the card itself may say that it will only do $20 on a contactless transaction. If it's a dual mode card, perhaps then you can just go ahead and insert it and use the chip reader and do a larger transaction. The terminal may have its own rules where the issuer may be okay with a $20 offline limit, but the terminal is only okay with a $10 offline or a $10 contactless limit. So business rules here do come in from acquirers as well as issuers. Performance testing is also one of my key areas. Performance testing is always important in payment networks. Anytime you're making a change to a acquirer host or a switch, you need to make sure that you can handle your peak TPS rate and that even subtle changes don't bring payments to a halt. EMV is going to add additional data at each level. This data is going to be primarily crypto related, but it's also going to be the fields that were involved in the crypto. For a typical EMV transaction, the transaction request is going to generate something called an ARQC, authentication request cryptogram, something like that. The ARQC is generated from a variety of information, a master key in your host simulator module. Oops, we're already touching another component in your system more than once because your HSM now needs to not just deal with the PIN, it's got to validate the ARQC. What else is in the ARQC? The transaction amount, the transaction counter, potentially the transaction type, various pieces of data that are unique to that transaction are encrypted with a unique triple DES key that may even be unique for that transaction, not just for that card. So there's a lot of layers of crypto. But just at the pure data passing level, whether it's from the POS or ATM to the device handler up to the payment network, and payment network to the issuer, there's more data to be sent and more data to be logged. On the return, on a transaction authorization, you're going to get an ARPC back, which is the ARQC, again encrypted with a unique key that's only known by the card and the host security module. And finally, when the terminal sends that data to the card, the terminal is going to create a transaction certificate that is going to be then used in your settlement log later that night to prove that the card eventually approved the whole transaction. It's a very multi-step process. So to me, performance testing is critical in any payment environment, but it's very critical when you're doing a big change such as adding something like EMV. So let's make sure we keep non-functional testing in mind as well as all the high level of functional testing that's going to be required. Jumped ahead of myself a bit. I already mentioned to you that there's various parameters of EMV data that will be preserved for your overnight batch files. And the important thing from our point of view, my division being a testing solution division, it's difficult today even to do, for instance, ATM testing with magstripe without a automation tool. Testing automation tools give you the ability to generate test scripts and reuse those scripts over and over. That's automation. But something else that's very important in a migration or a major implementation like this, you may have POS software developers that are working on the terminal application. Same thing for the ATM software developer. The device handler for that ATM or POS system may not be ready yet. It may not understand the EMV states, or it may not be able to hold the configuration data. You can also use testing tools as simulation tools, and they provide they can stand in for the host, or all the way up at the payment network level, perhaps you haven't gotten your agreement with the major payment networks yet to be online on their test network, but you can use a test simulation tool to provide that next generation network and validate your various transaction fields and all this additional EMV data. That brings up the last point. I had mentioned a lot of triple DES going on with the cryptography. Of course, the testing and simulation tools can calculate these EMV cryptography for you. And this brings up one of the most important things about testing, end-to-end testing, or what is the unit under test? If you are someone in the position of being an issuer and an acquirer at the same time, a fairly common condition for larger banking customers, you could have a dozen pieces of code that are changing. You don't want to change and test those all together at once because you're not going to be certain where the fault is. Always good practice with testing is to try to isolate the unit under test with testing and simulation software on both sides. So in the sample of a POS terminal, you may want to use a test card deck. You can buy test card decks from various suppliers that handle all of these 100 or multi-hundred test cases you're going to need to, your POS application is going to have to handle. But on the other side, you can also have a POS network interface that supports the custom interface from the POS machine. And by having test cards on one side of the terminal, a human still punching buttons in the middle, and a simulator on the other side, you've isolated that POS unit to be the unit under test. For ATMs, it gets even better because you can eliminate the man-machine interface, and you can do scripting and regression testing on the actual key entry and screens and all that sort of thing. With that, hopefully brief introduction to testing, I'm going to pass this on to Gerd, who's going to discuss contactless and mobile.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm the last speaker in the row, and I realize that we will probably go a bit over time, but I hope I will be able to still get your attention on this. So my name is Gert Thijs. I'm heading the team that's dealing with EMV level 1 and NFC. So I think I hope I'm the good person to make the link between EMV, NFC, and mobile payment. Now, since we don't have that much time left, it's clear that we have to narrow down the scope of this talk. So mobile payment to start with is very broad. You can think about remote payment, which is actually making a link with an online system and having a kind of authorization and authentication in this way. But this definitely doesn't have a direct link with EMV. However, if we look at the mobile contactless payment, here we clearly have a link with EMV. The link clearly is NFC. So NFC stands, as you probably all know, stands for Near Field Communication, which is a short-range contactless data exchange. So again, you use an antenna to exchange data over a short distance, so you don't have to insert, luckily you don't have to insert your mobile into a slot. But because NFC is incorporated in a device, and that device is the first thing we think about is a mobile handset, but it could also be a PC, a TV, or even a healthcare device, which brings us already into quite an interesting part of NFC. Payment is just one of the use cases. I will use that later on in the speech, just to show you where the possibilities of mobile payments lie. NFC comes in 3 modes. The first mode is a peer-to-peer mode where 2 devices communicate with each other using NFC. So if we compare to EMV, we don't have a similarity. In EMV, you will never take 2 terminals and try to put them together. It's something new. And there will probably be a lot of use cases even in payment. But I want to quickly bring you to the next 2 modes. The first one is a reader-writer mode, where your device, so think about your handset, is able to read a contactless card or a tag. So here we can already, let's say, make similarity with a POS, a contactless POS device. A third mode is a card emulation mode, where your device, so your handset, acts as a contactless card, and I want to focus a bit more on this one in the upcoming slides. And so to make, let's say, the link between NFC and EMV. Now, if we look at an NFC-enabled handset capable of doing card emulation, what we actually do is we rip apart the contactless card. We use the NFC-enabled handset, which has the antenna and which has the card emulation mode. And on top of that, we add a secure element where we store the card application. Because a chip card is actually a small computer, and the card application is software running on an environment. And since we have to realize that a handset is not a safe environment, we have to store it in a secure environment, for instance, the SIM. Now, luckily, and which means that I can reduce my talk considerably, NFC technology is interoperable with contactless communication protocol defined by EMVCo. It's not the same, but it's, let's say, backward compatible. So NFC as such is new. The data exchange on top of NFC is your typical EMV data exchange. And your contactless card application stored on secure element is very similar to the one you can find on a card. Therefore, we can talk about MasterCard Mobile PayPass and Visa Mobile PayWave, very similar to the contactless card counterparts. Okay. This means that a contactless mobile payment is actually a contactless card payment, which means that it's, let's say, a smaller step to bring mobile contactless payment into the EMV infrastructure. However, a mobile handset, as we all know, we all have our smartphones, has some nice additional features compared to a card. So one thing is the man-machine interface. So all of a sudden, our contactless card has a screen and a keyboard. We have communication over the air, so over 3G or Wi-Fi or whatever. We can communicate with a host system. So this opens up a completely new channel that allows us to communicate with our card outside of, let's say, the typical payment at the POS. And as I mentioned, NFC can be used in more than just a payment, which means that we can include, let's say, features like loyalty, couponing, but we can also think about geolocation to create a mobile shopping experience. And probably that's where this added value will hopefully boost mobile contactless card payment. I'm very. I realize that in this talk I'm very handset focused, but obviously bringing in this new device into the EMV ecosystem also requires some additional components in the system. For instance, the TSM, which is used to issue or can be used to issue card applications over the air. And obviously also, if you're a handset and if you have a man-machine interface, you need some additional applications running on the handset itself to allow the user to actually make selections of, for instance, a card application in case of multiple cards. So, and that's what a lot of people refer to as a mobile wallet. The communication with the payment system over the air I was talking about allows you to do some additional card management, to send issuer scripts over the air, but also to provide additional functionalities like balance inquiry, which you normally don't have at hand every moment that you when you have a card. This kind of gives a graphical overview of the system. So the handset and the secure element being only a part, linking the, let's say, payment domain we all know and where EMV takes place. with a space that we define here as a mobile domain, where it links into the payment space via a mobile gateway that allows for issuer script, for instance, and to a TSM for mobile issuing. When we quickly have a look at this quite innovative mobile payment app, there are some interesting characteristics or features that make them quite interesting. The first one is that it's quite dynamic. So you can, if you want to roll out a mobile payment application in general, one of the ideas or one of the options could be to start with some very basic functionalities and then later on build on top of that. For instance, not to start rolling out NFC payment, but have remote payment first and then include NFC payment later because of the complexity. So it's dynamic. If you want to reach a broad audience, you obviously need to roll out to multiple handset types, not to stick to one, for instance, the Google phone, and leave the others behind. No, you need to roll out to different handsets, different OS versions even, so this already gives quite a level of complexity, especially if you want to assure that everything is working fine. And obviously it's a showcase of a company. Everybody holds, let's say, a part of your company. The showcase is in the hand of your card holders. So it should work perfectly under all conditions. So it's clear that there's quite some risk on not testing extensively, because under certain conditions, chances are high that if you rush, it will fail under certain conditions. Security is very important. People have the handset in hand, but the handset has an OS like your regular OS on a PC. So there's some vulnerability issues here. And if you are going to include new functionalities, there obviously risk of regression. So to deliver new functionalities faster at a lower cost with reduced risks, you want to make sure that your test environment is as automated as possible. Automation, obviously, you can test faster. If you automate, it's much more repeatable. Your testing environment is more robust, and if you can reduce the human interaction, you also reduce risk of human errors during testing. As Greg already pointed out, simulators covering the multiple interfaces allow you to build a harness around your unit under test. So to, let's say, isolate it from the real environment to fully control the testing. And you have to think ahead. I already mentioned that it's typically something you start with basic functionalities. You extend, so you have to make sure that your testing environment follows this trend. Which means that also you want to typically use it in different stages of your development cycle. So testing is not something you do at the end. You want to include it during the development. And later on, obviously, before rolling out, you want to do your quality assurance. And each and every time you have a new functionality, you want to use your test environment in regression testing. So testing is obviously important. In a mobile environment, typically, because evolution is quite fast. So, and that's why this was added to this presentation. Ian, your turn.
Thank you very much. We are in danger of outstaying our welcome here, so I want to be very brief in summarizing some of the topics that we've talked about today. We don't want to be the bearers of bad news, but I think put very simply, in moving to EMV, that with a combination of new cards, terminals, message sets, applications, processes, there is a huge amount to do. I think experience has shown around the world that deadlines have been a little fluid, but there certainly comes increased pressure as we move towards the real dates of liability shift. So I think there are real benefits in looking to start early, not just to buy yourself some time, but also to show the market that you're taking this on seriously and actually use it as a competitive differentiator. EMV is all-encompassing. It's a philosophical change as much as anything. It's not just about hardware and software, but also encompasses people and processes. So a successful EMV migration program should consider all of these aspects. I think we have made the point very clearly, do not underestimate the testing aspect of all this. There are many new moving parts. There are clear benefits of putting together an end-to-end test automation framework to handle the integration and regression testing issues, particularly as you get increased release frequencies of some of these components as we move towards the deadlines. There are also benefits in using simulation to reduce the sequential risks of the delivery of some of these components as we go forward. The business case for EMV is a cost avoidance one. Put very simply, if we don't invest in this infrastructure, we could leave ourselves open to increased costs of fraud into the future. I prefer more positive business cases. If you're going to make this investment, let's look at how we can get some return on that investment by looking at some of the new things that we could maybe do, like we've just been talking about in terms of opening up the possibilities for NFC and mobile, also additional applications like loyalty, transportation. Let's look to leverage the investment and take it forward as a positive initiative. I think very simply, again, it's been done many times around the world. The US's comparative late entry into the world of EMV can actually be a benefit. There is a huge pool of expertise to learn from maybe other people's mistakes as well. So I think if you can draw on these experiences and this expertise, the US certainly has an opportunity to hitch a ride along the EMV road. As a follow-up to this presentation and as our final slide, we aim to send out copies of the slides via email to all the registered attendees. There's also some additional material on the Clear to Pay website where you can also contact us offline. And I think as we have overrun, I'd like to hand back to Joy, who's going to facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Oh, hello. So I'm afraid, unfortunately, that we're out of time and we won't be able to take the questions today. But I think Clear to Pay will try to get back to those that posted some. So now it just leaves me to thank all our speakers and the sponsor today and to remind you that the recording will be available on Bob's Guide. Thank you for attending today, and we look forward to welcoming you to another Bob's Guide webinar in the future. Thank you very much.